Hello everyone, welcome to my oil painting class. And today we painting snow and we're looking at tones and the use of minimal monochromatic color. So I have some white, ultramarine and Payne's gray or any other black you might need. So these are my colors today. I'm just going to show that this is ultramarine so you can see it in the palette, but the other colors are exactly what you see them, white and black. And we're using a gray background because that will be a neutral color, neutral tone for it all. And I'd love us to think of mainly tones, and then when the blue comes, it will be an extra um, shade to our tones. So if we were to look at the whole composition of our painting today, we can divide it into two halves. Well, not quite a half, into two parts. We've got the tree trunks with the light behind them, with a woodland probably behind, which has a lot of snow. Maybe there is a extra light. I think there was part of the road there, and the next row of trees, the other side of the path, had loads of extra light. And then we have all these beautiful undergrowth of the pine woodland with the snow covering it all. So we've got some brambles, we've got some ferns, we've got some grasses. That's really exciting. So the trees at the back will be our lightest tone. The foreground is going to be all medium darkness. And all the dark tree trunks will stay our most dark tones. Of course, there will be some darker shapes here as well, but that might be easier to break down our painting into segments and into shapes. Right, so I'm going to start sketching our composition, and then I'd love us to do a bit of color mixing and plan our tones. So I'm going to use a little bit of turbs and some ultramarine and black just to sketch our composition. Now, if I need to have a little bit of white with it so it doesn't look too black, I do want to have that bluey gray color, but don't want to be too dark. I can test it, how dark it is there. Now, on my board, I put a pencil line where I wanted to stop, so I'm just going to make it slightly darker so it's easier for you to see. So this is going to be my little sample side. So the format of my painting is going to be here. Right, so we said part of the painting is going to be almost horizontally divided into medium tone and into light tone. So let's find that segment. So if this is my halfway through the photograph, so it's almost perhaps a third, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less. I think it's more or less going to be a third. Okay, so roughly I can get that into here. Okay. It does look like it's going a little bit kind of dips in the center. So don't be scared of making it not a perfect straight line, but adjusting it gently. It'll be quite nice to have that extra gentle V shape within our painting. And then we're going to look at key trees. So we've got a big chunk of a tree quite close to us. We've got another one, or maybe a group of two, and then a couple of more on the side. The rest could come more spontaneously. So let's just focus on the three shapes. So the first one is the widest. So let's see, is it more in the center? I think the center is about here. So let's leave it a little bit more space and have the center a bit more free. So this is my center. Maybe I'll give it a bit more space. Okay, it's quite a wide shape and it's going quite low from the horizon line It's going to be covered, buried in the snow, but overall it's going to be here. And we can even shade it in a way, so we're not going to get frustrated which shape is which. If you wanted to use a bigger brush to paint it over, that will be fine as well. So something basic, but it's there. Okay. Right, then the next shape of the tree, let's balance our darkness, is something's going to be here. We can even look at the group of the trees. So it's almost like the darkness together. So there's a slightly wider tree, and there's a tree next to it, which makes the darkness together, almost makes that unity of the two trees together. There's a tiny gap and there is another one. So it's almost like reeds as a quite a wider shape together. So we're painting them as a group. Okay. And the group on the right hand side, there is another tree. Now we need to decide where all these trees are stopping. So our main big chunky tree trunk is going to be much lower than any other ones. The ones on the left had a little bit lower than the horizon line, but not too deep. And the ones on the right will be almost on that line, maybe just tiny bit more digging into the snow. Under the snow. Okay, and again, this might be a group of trees. Now, I'm not worried about the thinner lines for the very small trees. We can leave those ones out. We can add them later on. Or once at least you've done them as a group of threes, then you can perhaps add a couple of more. Let's say one next to our large trunk. And I might put a couple here. If you have more trees or less trees, including those thinner ones, it's absolutely fine. We probably will be working with that adjustment when we have our colors in. When we start mixing tones, when we start working more into details. If you are putting more like I have done, look out for spaces between the border of the paint into the tree, the gaps between the trees, the tree kind of widths. Anything else going to be kind of that rhythm is important. And we can constantly refer to it. Is one tree fallen? I might just give it a little gentler angle than it is on the photograph, if you want to do that. Okay. It depends how big your painting is. You can also add a tiny bit of indication on some of the branches, but that's more for practicing if you like that volume of branches, if you like having branches, how do you draw them, how do we sketch them, where they might be, which directions they might be going, because that's our opportunity to test it. If we like it, keep it. If we don't like it, get rid of them. Or maybe change the volume of how much details you'll see. Because we will be painting over these areas between the trees, so you will lose most of these branches. But for planning and for checking and testing, or making some connections. Sometimes that's good. Okay. Which branch is going to go up, which branches might go down, kind of creating that. Is it going to be too busy? Because once we're adding branches, we're almost like shrinking the empty spaces with extra details. Okay, so the calmness of certain areas without branches need to be balanced with the busy areas with the branches. And another is the diagonal of our undergrowth plants under the trees. So it looks like some of the brambles are stretching under the snow from bottom left corner upwards diagonally. So I'm going to get perhaps the tops of the snow or maybe some of the shadows. They're quite tricky to plan. Where do I draw? Do I draw just the gaps we left? We'll eventually paint them, but sometimes just outer line is easier to follow, and perhaps the outer lines for some of the darker shapes, but roughly diagonals are easier just to identify. So there's one diagonal, one kind of shape here, and there is another one coming across somewhere here. So if I think of brambles, if I think of plants which are leaning and being kind of pushed down with the volume of the snow, the heavy weight of the snow. So that's what I start seeing, simplifying them. Okay. So we're creating this almost like black and white, positive, negative spaces image, which contains mainly that. There is loads of subtones, there's loads of fine details, but let's just keep thinking of big shapes. Now in the top left corner of the snow, there's loads of busy things, so I'm just going to almost create the area where that busyness is going to stay, so then I know how much of fresh white is perhaps here. Okay, that might help me with some fresh white identification. Again, it's thinking, it's planning, it's deciding where the horizon is going to be lighter, where the horizon is going to be lighter above. Sorry, the spaces above the horizon will be lighter, where the spaces below the horizon is going to be darker or lighter. Okay, for example, here I might just move my line. I would have made it a little bit thinner. It might be a little easier to see shapes as well. There will be a little bit of lighter snow on this area because we've got a nice dark tree. I think that would be quite good to see some of those shapes. Perhaps changing the what's light, what's dark. I could be spending hours if I would have had a very large paper surface for the painting. You could really dig into all these exciting shapes, but we're going to try to keep them simplified. There's another dark corner of shadows somewhere here. And perhaps again, we'll help ourselves just getting a little bit of that darkness almost colored in. So once I'm happy with my big shapes, I'll paint them over again, simplified way, where shapes will be slightly darker. And I can amend as we're working into them. and they can adjust and they can have more character, more depth. But again, it just makes us think and look. And analyze. And if you were just drawing shapes and it wasn't making any sense, sometimes doing those shapes now gives you an opportunity to make connections. If you just do them all the same darkness at the moment, I'm going to have a series of lessons after this session where we're focusing on different snowy landscapes. It will give us an opportunity to practice various techniques, how to paint snow, various layering to show different types of snow, kind of how it settles in different environments. I think these little dabs of dark, it's too much for me. I'm losing the main concept, so that will be enough. So my planning of the composition is finished, and let's mix some color and most importantly tone. So first of all, I'd like to mix. I'm going to be using turbs, so I just closed my 3 oils tub. So I'm not gonna. So it's going to be drying quicker for me here. For the painting, I will use the 3 oils. It's much more richer surface, easier to mix colors, and the whole technique is changing. But for mixing colors, turbs is just good. Right, so I'm going to start with using white, and I'll mix it with black. Then I'd like to mix white with blue, and I'd like to mix white with black and blue, and see those ranges of darkness and see those ranges of color, very settled color. So direct white is easy because I'm going to make 3 rows of paint. I'm going to make 3 whites while I have got it on my brush. Just make them slightly bigger so I can actually see the colors a bit better. Okay, so the first one I'm going to be mixing with black, so white with a bit of black. So tiny dab of black with my white. That's quite a lot. So let's pick up some fresh white. Now I'm mixing the colors on a gray background because it helps me to see how those colors will start interacting on my painting surface afterwards. It's also gives me the kind of judging of, is that's a very pale gray, is that's much darker. So my background darkness will help me to differentiate what's that actual middle gray or what's lighter, what's darker. Okay, so it's a lot of help having another subtone already on our piece. Right, so pale gray, tiny bit of off-white. You might not even see much on the screen. I'm just going to make it tiny bit more darker. Sometimes diluted white will show the gray surface, but this is actual on the white palette, you can see it better here, the darkness of it. So to make the color very gently changing, see if you can wipe part of it on the side, or don't bring it fully straight away to your mixing area. So you have the opportunity to change very gently from the previous shade. Okay, it will be interesting to see at what point we'll start having the same darkness as my background. Now, if you mix it on a white, just keep it close to your primed surface, so you've got that comparison. Okay, I think that's where I think it's reflecting here. Tiny bit more. Darkness. So this section is almost as my gray. I think next one I can even leave it out. That's going to be my matching gray with the background. I think it's a tiny bit too dark now. Okay. That's a lot as well. Now it doesn't matter if you mix your colors, mix your paints, and you don't have the perfect order of your tones. That's not a big deal, as long as you see the differences and as long as you visually could input numbers with a pencil, which order they should be. I'm more interested in that you're making those various tones. It depends how much time you have. You can make more of them. Okay, stay a little bit more accurate and make more and more and more. Okay, that's might be a quick jump for me from my previous darkness. Let's see if I can paint it over a little. Would it be a big difference? Yeah, there is still a difference. That's good. Okay, and then if I put my solid black, you can see there could have been perhaps even another subtone. It's quite a powerful, it's still quite a powerful dark. And now if I put a solid black, okay, you might not see that on the screen, but I can definitely still see an extra jump from between the last two. Depends how it's reflecting on the surface. That's probably a better version of it. Okay. Okay, so our grays are finished, and I can already differentiate that these pale grays going to be probably part of my lightest background. Maybe some of these ones, maybe somewhere in the middle is going to be my front. And some of these ones gonna stay for my tree trunks and the gaps between. Now cleaning my brush so I can mix some paler and darker blues. And I want to make sure that my brush doesn't have black or gray in it, so the blue will stay fresh. So we already have a fresh white. So I'm gonna go and load my brush with fresh white and a dab of blue. Tiny dab of blue. Mixtures, not too runny or not runny at all. You can use some turbs, of course, to keep the colors mixing well, but try not to make the colors transparent so the gray background, if you're painting in a gray, is not showing. Okay, pale blue, a little bit more blue reading. Okay, it's not a huge change. Okay, I picked up some black within my blue. So let's make sure I pick it up from a different side, perhaps. Okay. The blue becomes quite strong. Blue on its own with white becomes quite strong, and we'll struggle to use a lot of it on its own. So the more we're getting that blue concentrated, the further we're going away from our photograph. And if you wanted to increase the blue to create an artistic version of the of this landscape, that's absolutely fine. But if you want to have more subtle tones, we're probably going to stop somewhere here. I think that might be enough of darkness of blue. Of course, we can make it super, super dark, but I think it is not something we will use. Otherwise, it will be too strong. Okay. So I'm probably not going to go any further. I don't think I'll need that color. But these four probably will be quite exciting to apply. Okay. And let's have a look at mixing blue and black together. So I already have some blue here. Just gonna add a bit more white, so to keep it pale. I'm gonna add a tiny bit of black, but I need to have a lighter tone first. So when you be mixing these three, I always want you to kind of to compare them with two previous layers. Does it feel like it's too much blue there, or does it feel like it's overwhelmingly gray? So you need to have something roughly in the middle. So what I've done, I've ended up mixing quite a lot of slightly darker tone, and that's okay. I just tried to make it a bit more even, and then I made it slightly more white just to tone it down. Otherwise, okay, so that looks a little similar to my blue gray. Okay, but definitely there's quite a lot of gray present there. Maybe I could make it even paler. Okay, that looks a bit better. Okay, next one. And then slowly getting darker. And again, constantly comparing, is it more looking like blue, or is it still has that gray in it? But we also don't want it to look just gray as in the first line. It looks a little too dark too quickly, but I think that will work somewhere here. So let's make it slightly lighter. Okay, so I definitely can see a hint of blue in these in comparison to those, and definitely not as bold in color as in the middle row. Yeah, that's quite, again, big jump. Okay, and then start adding a bit more. And a bit more blue is it. Sometimes adding a dab of extra blue, more interesting tones and colors for the darker version of the blue-gray. So we might have more varieties. Okay. Too similar. Is that a little too similar still? Yeah, that's better. And maybe a couple of more. If you go more into the blue side, you know it's not going to look like fresh blue anyway, because the black, the gray is not going to allow it to stay super fresh blue. So it's easier to mix more varieties of darker tones. Okay, so I'm going to stop here. Even I can't make my super darks here. Okay, so that's another way of kind of finding out that you can expand on the varieties of lights by using just gray, just blue and blue-gray. Middle tones, the same, but the blacks, you can have even more by just using black and blue. Of course, you can use, in a way you compensate for what you can't quite do with a blue on its own. So that expenditure of extra varieties could be done by a blue-gray. Very exciting. Another quick experiment I'd like to show you is how we're going to plan our colors. I'm gonna have two quick, right, tiny bit more darker so we can see the outlines of it. Plan of our overall colors, and let's have two versions. So overall, our composition, so if you consider that that's number one and that's number two versions. So we have our horizon somewhere there. got our trees there, but we have a lot of black and white tones on a photograph. We can have a plan A, well, plan 1, where we can have our light done painted via the warm colors using grays. That's kind of perhaps more warmer, okay? And the foreground then will become more blue-gray, okay? So then the top is not going to have any blue at all. And the plan 2 could be the opposite. And the dark trees could be either, okay? We're just going to have lots of darks. So I'm going to very quickly just use the white with a little bit of black as to get my pale grays. Okay, so that's not quite the color I want, darkness I want much paler version. So if I were to use that as my just warmer tone, white and black. Okay, in this case, ivory black is better because it has more kind of brown tones in it. Okay, and for the second piece, I'll use these grays, but obviously not the same darkness. I'm going to make it a little darker or the same as my current gray, but it's going to be gray. Okay, so I'm just going to more or less paint it similar to what we had, or even partially could have left the background color we had before. Okay, and then make my lighter tone for the second piece with extra blue. So I'm going to get rid of my gray from my brush. Go for more fresh blue, pale blues. Okay. So tonally, they should remain the same, but that beauty of color presence will make a different range. Yeah, that our picture might look different. And the same for the first image, I'm going to use more bluey black of a similar darkness to our second image, but it's going to be more into the blue. Okay, might be less. It's not going to be huge change, but there will be that change. Yeah, and that's kind of a smallest variation of what we can do when we plan our painting. Color, very settled color. So I'm holding the board so it's not reflecting, otherwise you can't see anything there. So sorry, it's wobbling here. Okay, so can you see that? Tiny bit of blue, more gray, warm. More warmer, paler gray, more blue there. And then the darkness of the trees could come in, whatever variety. If you wanted to have more blue on one side than the other, yeah, that might be totally, might be the same, or you might increase it more. On one piece, another. So those are variations of our paintings. Yeah. That's where our thinking comes in as well. Maybe there will be more blue on the trees where we have more warmer colors. Maybe we'll have more blues on the trees where in the opposite image where we have warmer colors in the lower part. Yeah. So again, something to to consider when we're painting. Okay, so very small change, but for the final painting might be quite significant. So I'd love you to make that decision. It doesn't have to be the same as mine, but I'd love you to make that decision. I think I'm more leaning towards the first option, where we have more cooler shadows at the front and a little bit of warmth on the light at the back. But it could be a totally reversed image there as well. So let's give it a go. Right, so a lot of people ask me, once you've done your sketch and you already have your background darkness, you already maybe sketch with something a little bit darker, what do you start painting with? To me, it's quite obvious. I have my medium background darkness. I have my darks. I'm going to have to start with light, okay? There will be some bold whites, but I'm going to start with something here in this range, okay? So I can make things lighter. I could go for something here as well, but sometimes I find it, if I start with the darker ones, it's easier to go on. Depends how much, obviously, of the white you've got left, but it looks like the white strokes will be my probably last strokes, but it doesn't have to be. That's works for me on this particular painting, I think. So let's start again. Let's come back to these two sketches. I'm gonna go for a warmer backdrop. So I'm going to have fresh white. I'm now using my 3 oils. I'm gonna go for fresh white. I'm gonna use the clean side of it. Okay. And I'm going to use a dab of black. So for the top side of the painting, I'm not going to use any blue. Okay, if I wanted to check if that's my correct color, can I go a little bit more darker? Yes, I can, but not too dark. I want it to look darker than my current background. That's what's going to help me. So if I want to preserve some of the branches between the trees, I can leave a little bit of space out for them. If it's too complicated, just paint over your branches and we can sketch the branches later. Sometimes painting spaces can give you those branches on their own. And a lot of artists use that technique. To show that range of depths by using a color of the background. So far, I'm just going to use that darkest version of light to paint all of my background behind the trees. So quite straightforward. Try not to make too fine details or too much, not to worry too much. If I don't get perfect strokes or the ends of the shapes don't look perfect, that's all good, because we'll be topping things up with other darknesses and lights. Tiny bit more paint as I'm running out. So we want to see immediate impact of light on our background. At the same time, it's not direct white. So that's where the V shape is going to be, that more pointy corner of light. Brush is a little splitting, so I'm going to pick up a new brush. You can correct your silhouettes of your trees as well. If you stay with straight lines, that will be easier for you. Also, if you want to create extra tree trunks using your background color, you can just leave few shapes out as well. But it's not an essential. Okay. I'm gonna smudge these, put that darkness back. I think United Tree is better here than I subdivided it. Okay, that's better. So we suddenly have extra depth, light behind. Now, if we want any extra trees, smaller, narrower trees, we can add them now, or we can add them later on. I might just put a little bit now before I start doing any extra light tones, so we can see where we can avoid some of the darknesses. So all I'm going to do, I'm going to make perhaps a lighter gray and just go for a little extra, probably appearing, disappearing shapes. So they don't have to go from top to bottom of the tree trunks. They might be somewhere coming out from the top and then stopping. They coming out to the bottom and stopping. Again, it will be tracking that light. Will be quite exciting. . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . Nice. Okay, I think that's enough. And we can check if some of the gaps again between the trees are too similar. Maybe we can gently support that so that variety is not too similar. Okay, maybe something like that. Right, and now let's have a look at some extra highlights. Maybe between some of the trees we'll have more and more light coming through, and I'd love to use more of that light gray, and perhaps finish it off with some off-white and fresh white. So I'm mixing it again, just gray and white. And I think hopefully I should be getting this color maybe a tiny bit darker. So soft changes of any of those darknesses now, yes? So if we're somewhere here, we need any of those. And I'm gonna go probably in the center areas. You might just see very gentle change, and that's enough as long as you can see it. Now I'm using a little thicker paint now, so it's not you're not rubbing it in, you're placing it in between the shapes, between the shapes of the trees. If it doesn't make big change in darkness and you kind of you're losing that light, don't be scared of going for even lighter tone, almost even fresh white sometimes, because we're painting on a darker surface, and that will allow your, well, it will mix your fresher tone with the background color. So you will have an in-between chunk. Okay, that's quite nice. Again, if you were to leave a little bit of spaces for possible branches of new shapes, perhaps, as you paint in them, sometimes doing a different type of direction stroke, instead of straight stroke, doing a bit more diagonal stroke, you'll have a different reflective surfaces, and you will start having slightly different grays just because you're applying the paint slightly differently. Look what's happened in this area. Suddenly I start having more trees and perhaps some sort of extra light. I don't have to put it now in between all the gaps of the trees, but perhaps I can do another V shape of light traveling. Maybe not covering as much lower parts, maybe going on the tops. Yeah, just following it through. And I do quite like having a little bit of low light in this area because I want to make this snow much lighter. So if I were to go just for this lower part, and again, just follow that V shape, it will give me quite an exciting light. Okay. And again, perhaps on the left-hand side, if I follow that V, yes, so I've got light coming through here, light coming through there, tiny bit lower perhaps. And then that light might come through a bit more bolder. So here, and definitely again closer to the surface of the darker tones, which we'll be adding shortly. Okay, and I think I'm ready for some bold, fresh white. I just need to get some fresh paint out. There's anything here which has too much texture for me. Okay. And again, on those lighter tones, I'm going to put fresh white on some of them. Again, if this is my center point, kind of my focal point, maybe that white and the contrast is going to be gathering there most. So this white is much stronger, and I can just even place it without any oils directly. And use a little dabs as my individual strokes. Just from time to time, just make sure you put your paint on the tip of the brush so you don't have chunks unevenly on your bristles. It will be harder for you to control your strokes. Okay, maybe a little bit extra light behind this tree. It's quite nice how a little more softer paint below this layer is being pushed about. Again, the pattern of white will be quite exciting to follow through. And you can come up with all sorts of almost diagrams for how the white could be spread. Just a little more somewhere here. I always tend to put white at the end, so it's the most dark tones. So we can come back to the fresh white and perhaps touch it once we know further development of our darknesses and if anything needs to be supported with it. But at least we have that initial boldness. I want to put some bolder, so that's where maybe my fresher white might need to be topping up on some of the borders, contrasting with extra grays here. Okay, I'm much more excited about that. So once we identified our lights, of course we can tweak them after, we have got that formula of light established, okay? Now my next step will be work more into the darks of our trees and some of the shadows and gaps of undergrowth where you can see some of the plants before we get to our middle ground darknesses, okay? So I'd like to pick up now a darker color. So here's my oil. So I'm going to work now into both black and white, blue and black. I don't think there will be direct blue, but any of our darks will be fantastic. Now, as I have no blue behind my trees, maybe I'll put slightly more blues on top and more blackish grays for the undergrowth to have that contrast, okay? So let's go for some blue. Let's go for some black. Let's mix it well so there is no in between grays or marbling effect, whatever's left on my brush. And I will be interested in making the darknesses slightly darker than my current, the quick washes I've done. Depends on what type of washes you've done when you were sketching. If you've done them reasonably light, you can just leave quite a lot of that paler gray out and work with a new tone. Let me see if I can lift this, maybe drop it down. So let's go for smaller brush. I'm just going to do a couple of larger strokes first, and I think I'm going to go for smaller brush so I can add more defined thinner lines for my trees. Okay, so it's not again the darkest stone yet. It's dark, but it's not the most dark. Let's do a tiny bit more here. So we gently build up that darkness. Okay, the depth is already coming through. Right, as I said, if we want to go further into the lower areas, we go for more into the gray rather than blue. But if you have some blue there, it'd be fine as well. But most importantly, it's a little bit darker. Okay. Especially close to the horizon, you can have a little bit more extra blue. So don't cover all your paler darks, but just identify if there are any extra depths in there. So maybe patterns, maybe just a few marks. Maybe you don't know what actually they are, but feels right. That's all good. Try to go through that range of color if you can. Or if we jump too quickly to the darks, we'll need to make sure we'll come back to in between tones of these darks. Anything further back, those darker shadows will start getting lighter. So I know this tree is probably of a similar distance because it's a big tree and all these ferns are close to it. So I'll keep it darker, similar, but further back they become much more paler. So I'm going to leave them out for the moment. Anything else here? Let's see. Okay. And now I'm going to go even darker. I'm going to go as much blue as I can first because I want to top up some of the tree trunks. So as much blue as I can with my dark. It's not going to be able, we're not going to be able to see direct blue, but we will see its strength. That's lovely. That's really nice. If I paint vertical strokes for my tree trunks, they will remind me the texture of the bark, and that will be quite good as well. And as the oil shines and the different thickness of the strokes come in, you will have that texture showing even more excitingly. Picked up some white on the side by accident. And not too much variation. That's probably my largest tree, so I'll probably spend more time with its texture. But I will be simplifying my other trees, unless we are painting much bigger pieces, which we are not. So just a small identification of the darkness, perhaps darker at the top and getting slightly lighter in the center. Using a smaller brush will help us to touch up some of the tiny trees, or narrower trees, but still having that depth. I haven't done a in-between tone there, but I think by the time I smudge it into our grays, that's a lovely tree. That contrast is really exciting. Okay, again, maybe something at the top, and maybe it stops. Maybe it will continue to some of the branches. Okay, that's not dark enough. Otherwise, it's gonna be too intense. Maybe I don't need to touch up the branches at all. They become a little bit too chunky. I have to come back with the white to improve that. Also helps us to tidy some of our trees if they ended up a little too wobbly. Okay, I don't want to do all trees the same darkness or the same kind of intensity. And I can come back a little bit lighter as well. So these trees are not super dark, but they can have a little bit more intensity. And again, not the same intensity from top to bottom, kind of charge it up with darkness maybe at the top or middle, or a little bit at the bottom, or kind of have those variations planned. This tree is almost looking like a sausage, wide, narrow, so I need to make it more looking like a tree. Okay. Maybe this one's going to have intensity in the middle. It's not going to have anything dark on the top or bottom. And maybe this one will have a lot of extra darks on the bottom. Because there might be some extra darkness around it, and I don't want to lose it if it will be all paler. And again, if we need to touch things up, Once we have other tones around, we can come back and adjust the other shapes. I'm going to tweak my white branches here back to some lighter tones. That's better. Just tweaking my white, which I just smudged. That's better as well. So much more happier with the background now. If I want to add any gaps between the trees, wider trees, if you wanted to drag a little bit of light, I think that looks a little too precise. So perhaps if I make it softer, that's better. Not so intensive and straight. Okay. And we can tweak a little bit of darknesses as well on anything below in areas. I'm gonna go for more black and white, mainly the blacks without blue, if I can help it. And well, actually, I have done quite a bit of it here, but I've noticed I haven't done it in a few shapes around this area. Perhaps I can do some branches of the brambles, might give me an opportunity to add extra textures or future lines, or kind of how the snow is going to be overlapping shapes. So now I know some of the diagonals and some of them leading type of structures. There are loads more at the back, but they're much paler. So if I'll have it done in a lighter version, then that's going to overwhelm. Something busier there. Okay, I'm happy with that now as well. Right, now let's focus on the snow at the front. So far it's already uniting the whole painting, and kind of we need to stay within that darkness, maybe a little bit more darker overall, but we will be putting some darker strokes first for the snow before we do tiny bit more highlights. Okay, so be with me there first. I'm going to use larger brush now because I want to do some scooping strokes. So I'm going to load it with my oil. And I'm going now to use quite a bit of blue with my black and white. So blue is loaded first. Well, white, blue, before we get the black. Want to test it, so that looks quite light. So I might need more darker tone. And I'll probably need to mix quite a bit of that paint, so I'm not going to run out quickly. Actually, already running out of my blue. So nice intensive blue. Obviously, I don't want to use it on its own. I'm going to test it here, and I want to calm it off with a little bit of black. I can then check, obviously, blacks makes this paint altogether darker. So I'm going to check it against my background. Yeah, and I can just easily add a tiny bit of extra light. So I'm balancing, first of all, enough blue in my paint, only then add some black, and then amend it with, yeah, with how light or dark it should be. Right, so what I'm going to do some big strokes covering the big surfaces, doing those scoops of snow, okay, almost kind of covering, producing that snow, how snow settled. Okay. So if we shrink some of the darks we painted earlier, that's absolutely fine. Okay, where else this chunk is going to go? We can put a little bit on the branches as well. Some of the branches will disappear as well. That's why I put a little bit extra. Okay, looking for some of the directions here. So it's harder to see. It would have been much harder for you to see what I'm doing now if not my blue. Okay, because the tone is very similar, maybe a dab darker. So I'm happy with that darkness here. So again, just going over a few shapes, just thinking that blanket of snow coming and covering everything. You're running out of paint and you need to mix some more. If it comes a little different, don't worry about it. Slightly lighter, slightly darker, slightly blue, slightly grayish. That will be great. That's not a problem. I think I'm ready for, after this stroke, ready to mix more paint. So perhaps a little more of a similar color somewhere here. So we're making everything flat without tone. Whatever the background is left gives us a little extra light, but we'll work with that soon. Okay, I'm happy with that. And I'm going to make a little bit of darker blue-gray, just a shade darker, so I can finish off an overall maybe shape here on the left, and maybe here at the top right of the snow, maybe some of the shadows here. So just a little bit overall darkness. And again, I can just check it against on my side of the board. So I'll want to paint all of this as a group of darkness. And if I preserve some of the branches, I will. If not, it's not a big deal. it's more directions. It's more if I'll have a little bit of that tiny darkness present. But all of that corner almost sits on its own. Yeah, you've got suddenly depths. So it's perhaps somewhere here. And some of that darkness just behind the tree. I keep smudging some white, so that's one of the reasons I tend to use paler colors, or especially bold ones, where they're bordering other shapes last. Okay, that's better. And some shadows here. I'm going way out of my borders of the painting here, but I can cut that easily. Maybe a little bit of shadows on the border here, just shows those big shapes of snow. Kind of one surface, flat surface, starting to separate from them. Raised surface. Okay, that might be enough. Immediately, our front became much more cooler. Immediately, we've got extra depths and variety. Yeah, and we'll just tweak things up and add nuances at the front and play with the shapes. But those are big snow identificational kind of shapes. Right, and now I'm going to continue working with my light brush to put some highlights now on the snow. So again, I'll go for white. I'm going to go for fresh blue. I need to find a tone which will be probably the darkness of my background, but the background looks much more warmer. So let's go for extra blue. This is my earlier gray, so maybe I'll use that. So my blue is not going to be too blacky blue. Don't think that lifts it as much. So let's give it a go a bit more. Okay, so if I test it, I need it a tiny bit lighter. Be extra careful so your highlight on this medium background, medium tone is not going to be competing with the light at the back. So testing, testing, testing. Even if you don't have a spare surface to test it next to your piece, maybe put an air palette and then just marking it on the tissue even and just comparing it there and then. Or even just placing a mark on your painting. Okay, that's almost there, but I might make it slightly lighter as I know I'll be introducing it to a wet surface, meaning full of oil and paint, and I need to compensate for its extra darkness. So let's work for this. Okay, that's nice. So now I'm going to do a little more individual strokes which will kind of, I'm looking for those heaps and shapes where the snow bumps almost separated from bigger groups into a little smaller ones. So maybe there is a little bit of sagging of snow. Okay, still I find it easier to do with a bigger brush than a tiny one. It gives me that softness and roundness of shapes. Okay, that to show those volumes of snow. So I'm almost hugging the previous color. If you started noticing it's getting tiny bit too dark, I started getting similar darkness as I already have it on the painting, just top it up with paler shape. Okay. And mingling the shapes, going with your own flow is good. If you're following something and it helps you, that's great. If you lost a little bit that process of what's happening, which shape is which, just go with what you have on your painting and on a photograph. We always follow that rule, especially at this stage. So something on top of the heaps of snow and something on a flat surface where the surface is much more 90 degrees to the sky. Yeah, those flat surfaces. We obviously see that's not always those surfaces are going to be in front of us, but occasionally we'll see them. I'm doing a stroke or two and I'm topping up my color, so I want to keep it fresh. I want to continue some of that playfulness of the branches. So I'm topping them up with some fresh snow as well. That's when they become a little bit more lost. At the same time, they're united together by that color, by the range of shapes. If you would have had much more variations, it's much harder to do. It's harder to keep the unity. But often unity is more important because within those shapes we can subdivide colors, subdivide variety. That's looking much more exciting now. Got a little bit too much repetition of shapes here, so let's summarize that. If you want to make a little bit of extra light somewhere, maybe in this corner, just to have a gentle, not breaking through in light, but take that focal kind of point leading towards that light. Okay, maybe by the time I crop this, I might not see much here, but this might be enough. So some thinner lines of grasses, some wider chunks. It's all of that variety again we're looking for. A little bit more thinner lines and shapes, quite like that unity at the back. But if I'll add a little bit of, okay, maybe darker tone, not as light. A little bit of busyness there, but not overdoing it. That would be enough for that distance. Although on the photograph there's very, very busy, and the second we start seeing it, it's a danger that we start overpainting that area. I think that looks better. Something happening, but not too much information. Okay. And again, we can come back with some of the darks if I'm finding some gaps where I can tweak some of the shapes and add to it if I want to add any extra plants. Just carefully not over busy in the areas. Again, because once we've done the lovely round shape strokes, if you start adding a lot of texture, that unity of roundness shapes will start disappearing. So just be careful. Anyway, overlapped and spoiled the shapes. Just a tiny bit more here. And of course, I could have put more and more details, but where do we draw the line? Where do we stop? I would prefer to stay more simplified than overdo. Sometimes the opposite, I bring kind of, after I've done a lot of busyness, I simplify things back, and it is more often than not, it improves the whole painting. So I think I'm going to stop now. I've got enough kind of exciting things to see. But if you want to do tiny bit more shapes for the snow on the trees, I think for me they're working quite well. I don't think I need any more. If you needed a little bit more nuances at the front, or if you need to simplify things, give it a go. Might just tiny bit check this bark that I'm happy not to, okay, not to do too much. Yeah, just a little bit of that connection with the snow and the color. I think that's better. Bring tiny bit of that darkness again. Just to split that. Evenness. Not so good. And I'm going to stop now. So thank you very much for today. Take your time spotting those soft shapes at the front and working through them, but don't get lost. And I look forward to seeing your paintings finished. Thank you.